Please welcome back to the stage, Ryan Solomon.
As we get everybody else to kind of filter back in from the refreshments area, this next panel is pretty exciting and obviously relevant. One of the more trending topics throughout Web3 and the world over the past couple of years is kind of after the chat GPT moment, the ways that distributed ledger technology and AI are going to start converging. So we have the panel AI meets distributed ledger, scaling responsibly. We're going to be covering one of the biggest topics in tech this year, which is the intersection of AI and blockchain. Please welcome to the stage Shyam and our panelists up on the stage.
Yeah.
Wow. I believe this topic is probably what a lot of people came here for. If you haven't or put your hands on AI yet, then you're living under a rock. AI is changing the way how we live our lives, and it's impacted all the way from my 12-year-old daughter doing her homework assignments to our everyday individual life. So this is I'm delighted to have a very distinguished panel with me, and why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself? I'm Shyam Nagarajan. I'm the CEO of Hedera, and I'm excited to have the rest of the gang here. Please go ahead, Greg.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Greg Whalen. I'm the CTO of Prove AI.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. I'm Jim Nasr. I'm the CEO of Acoer, and embarrassed to say I was actually at Hedera 18 way back in the day, so it's been a minute, but great to be back.
Hey everyone, I'm Rebecca Liao, co-founder and CEO at Saga.
Jonathan Dotan, founder of EQTY Lab. Great to be here, Shyam.
Awesome. Listen, this is very exciting. AI, as you know, has been in the forefront of everything we do, but how much of it do we actually trust? So this conversation is where AI meets blockchain, and I would love to start with, maybe I'll start with you, Jonathan, to share what you're working on in this space and how this applies to you.
Sure. So EQTY Lab focuses on AI governance, which means that we think about how we can express various forms of governance, and those could come from regulations, they could come from company policies, and then we find ways to ensure that it can be the implementation of that governance is audited and also enforceable. And the amazing thing about the cryptography is that it provides us a way to establish this type of trust that Shyam's talking about, but we can do so in a way that is tamper-proof, it's interoperable, and it's privacy-preserving. And as we start to think about the challenges that we have with AI right now, the actual critical question around how we're going to get massive adoption of AI really comes down to this question of how you can ensure that it is properly governed. And if you can establish that type of trust, that means you can start to get into more complicated workflows like agentic workflows that are autonomous and kind of really maximize the full potential of AI. So early innings, but also really exciting proof points that this is working and at scale.
Cool, very cool. Rebecca?
Well, Jonathan, I'm glad that you ended on that note because it segues nicely into what's happening on Saga. So full transparency, Saga is a general purpose layer 1 blockchain. We are layer 1 to launch layer 1s, which means that all developers are by definition building on their own chains on Saga. So we are not an AI company. We do not have our own AI solutions built in-house. But when you have a chain that is built for scalability like ours is, naturally AI activity finds its way to Saga. So Jonathan, what you were talking about in terms of sort of a frontier edge use case of agentic activity being proven on-chain and then having those agents act as autonomous economic actors within the chain ecosystem, consumers went there. They were scared about it for maybe a few hours when they first heard about the concept, and then they thought, this is really cool. I have my own fleet of agents, or a lot of games are building on Saga. I have my own fleet of NPCs that are able to have their own ability to trade on Saga, to have ownership of in-game assets, to be able to engage in liquidity wars, any sort of commercial or economic activity. And so trustability of the chain becomes incredibly important because I do think that there's no way consumers would actually hand this sort of power over to these agents unless they knew that they were able to verify the actions of the agents on the chain. And I think eventually there will be some component of learning models being verified on chain as well. Because in the end, you want these agents to be an extension of yourself, but you don't want them to sort of go rogue and have no way to track it back per se.
Cool. Jim?
Yeah, so we're in the healthcare space. Our primary use case is really all to do with tracking substance abuse and mortality due to substance abuse at the opioid space. So, John, to your point, in terms of like our function, really, I would say it's garden variety pipeline automation. And it's very much going down agentic paths. There is a lot of opportunity for automation, for efficiencies. But really the question is, okay, yes, you're taking, as example, like a real example, we're taking toxicology data and we're doing what we call verifiable intelligence. But the question is, well, what is your algorithm? What is your model? What is it doing? What does the training data looks like? And what is the lineage of all of that? So in our world, I think full automated agentic AI is still some ways off because for various reasons, if not just from a process, there's a need to involve subject matter experts. However, there's a tremendous amount of room for efficiency. So that's really what we're doing. We've kind of evolved our if you like, our conventional Hedera services and verifiability services and added this layer of agentic AI. And really, we're trying to ultimately make the process of taking siloed opioid data, doing analytics, doing AI, reporting on it, both smarter and a whole lot faster.
Right?
Good. Thank you. So at Prove AI, we're focused on de-risking the development of AI. So, right, one of our core tenets here, right, as a product is to not disturb developers, right? So what we want is for people to develop AI solutions. We want them to partner with third parties who are building on AI, right? And we want to make this whole exchange of risk posture as easy and as frictionless as possible, preferably with no impact to the people who are doing the actual, work here. One of our other tenets is show your work, right? So I think there's a big theme here about automation, right? So if we work backwards from the problem, multiple parties need to share, work with each other. We need to share our risk postures with each other. How on earth are you going to do that without showing your work to each other, right? The world of SLAs, I think, worked fine for software development. They don't work well for AI development, right, for a bunch of reasons, right, mainly because there's more things involved, there's high velocity data behind the scenes, things that I think everybody here, right, understands, right? So our solution, right, is designed to have multiple parties log into this, into our solution, define what the risk postures are, right, and that's possibly compliance, it's possibly not compliance related, it doesn't matter, right, it's whatever you as two parties think that you need to have an eye on, right? And then we rely on the automation providers of the world to give us that data so that we have that chain of trust from end to end, right? That's ultimately securely communicated, right, across parties. And right, for us, we're built entirely on Hedera, right, to make that a reality as our ledger.
Cool. So governance, launching AI to support the layer ones that are building AI in healthcare and underpinned by DLT and blockchain and Hedera. And finally, again, making sure development of AI is safe, secure, responsible. And so AI per se, everyone is touching AI. I mean, I've been using Gemini, ChatGPT, Read AI, Fireflies, Grammarly, and this continues to go on. Data is being fed in constantly. We do have a trust problem. Deepfakes are continuing to grow. Models are hallucinating. We can't catch it. If you're not a subject matter expert, you wouldn't know that the model just hallucinated the response that it gave. And new concerns, especially with privacy, DeepSeek just came by and it changed the whole world. I mean, that wasn't a long time ago, 3 weeks ago. And guess what? Today, apparently, in China, 90% of the most used model is DeepSeek, and it's starting to take over some of the other parts of the world as well. So the question to you, and I do want to put a lens on it to say, how does DLT bring a level of responsibleness in this? And if you could talk to that a little bit, and maybe we start with Jim, you first, and then we go to other panelists.
Yeah, certainly. So I'm an optimist. I feel like the regulators are actually an enabler. So I'll give you a specific citation. So the FDA at the beginning of this year came up with this guideline for AI usage and very explicitly says, it's really unprecedented, says if you're dealing with patient safety data as a sponsor, as a pharma company, we need you to be explainable. We need you to show like what algorithm you're using, what is happening with the training data, and some transparency and traceability. That to me is a really good thing because this world of clinical research or opioid tracking, things like this, largely is opaque. And when you add AI on it, and agentic AI or automated AI or self-automated or semi-automated, you could be extremely opaque. You could be extremely black box. So to me, part of this, how do we make this AI more responsible, more ethical, is, if nothing else, verifiability of the core elements, such as what is the active model, what is the lineage of the model as you're training it, what is happening with the training data, can you make the active training data available to your auditors, to users, to the regulators? And can you do all, and then this is where Hedera comes in, to your point, Shyam. Can you do all of it in an abstracted way? Can you do it without users having to faff around with wallets and native tokens and things like this? And that, to be honest with you, that is why I'm excited by Hedera. Continue to be excited because I feel like even in a nostalgic, conservative world of life sciences, there's mandate to be explainable, but the tooling is actually here. And of course there's all kinds of, like DeepSeek. I mean, honestly, we're using DeepSeek now, but we're doing it locally with very minimum resources. But that's a game changer versus paying, Amazon Nova or paying ChatGPT huge amount of money and having no control over the model.
Very cool. I mean, the fact that you are playing around and actually using DeepSeek, where I hope it's in a controlled environment where the information is not transferred to China or some of the hosted behaviors. That's a very interesting adoption pattern I'm seeing. Jonathan, you and I were at Davos. We saw a lot of this replayed in different forms. I'd love to hear from your perspective on how do you bring more trust from the works that you've been doing at EQTY Labs.
So one thing I think it's important to recognize is that Hedera has been on the forefront of enterprise integration with blockchain since the very beginning. I used to joke, and I say this very lovingly, that Hedera would bring kind of the khakis to the blockchain party, right? Because it's a totally different culture to understand how you walk into a Fortune 1000 company and try to explain to them how they're going to take their mission-critical systems and bring that on chain. And Hedera was focused like a laser beam on this and hired the talent, developed the technology. And now we're in this incredible moment, and I think we saw that together, in which you have the largest corporations of the world undergoing the most dramatic transformation of their entire existence. Every single one of them is being transformed by AI. And their challenge is that now, as they go through this transformation, they need to establish new forms of business practices and trust that not only can be contained within their own systems, but that they can be interoperably shared with others. Does this sound like a familiar problem, right? We've been dealing with this when Web3 from the very beginning. Solutions like Saga, they are architected fundamentally to be decentralized in order to be able to syndicate trust in and out of these systems. So we've arrived at this moment in which finally all these things have come together, and now we're seeing the largest corporations in the world realizing they have to establish this form of trust. And number two, and this is the hardest part, AI is not like any other type of software that we've had in our history, and specifically open source AI is not like other forms of open source technology. What we've been talking about with something like DeepSeek as an example, which is an open source model, it presents massive risks of an order of magnitude that we have not even yet understood. And so therefore we can't just go as business as usual. We need to deploy proper safeguards, and we're seeing the emergence of what's being called sovereign AI systems. And this is where you have governments and the cloud providers and others coming together to say, we're going to have principles in which we're going to enact sovereign guidelines to ensure that when AI is now operating in this country, that it abides by the laws of that country. Now, we can have a discussion about the appropriateness of that and what it could do to innovation. I'm all for that discussion. Nonetheless, it's a fact of life at the moment. And so what you get with the verifiability is not just the interop between a supply chain of different actors using AI, but you also have the ability to prove that you've met the compliance requirements of a sovereign AI framework. And I can say with full confidence that the preparation, the culture, the thinking that Hedera has had from its very beginning is what's equipped it to be in the perfect position to execute on that.
Thank you, Jonathan. I mean, we are very excited about the work Jonathan and the team are doing with NVIDIA and Intel, especially offering what calls that verifiable compute that gives you that proof that you need for attestations and AI and the likes. Let me take this to the next level, which is, look, AI without data is nothing. Data is coming from everywhere today, IoT devices, humans, cell phones, all the way to historical data, historical information from large organizations, right? How do you secure this data? How do you provide privacy, data sharing? I mean, you bought DeepSeek is a model that's built in China. And now for that to be used in a sovereign cloud in the United States or in UK, how do you know that the data it has been trained is actually what can be used within the country? So I would love to get some perspectives. You know, Greg, perhaps you could start, and I would love, Rebecca, your perspective as well. And we'll end with you, Jim, on how does this happen in the healthcare side of it as well. Okay, is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So the issues around data governance, just who's using data is one of the biggest problems that have come out from our prospects, right? That's the first problem to solve, and that's what people are worried about. Like within data, though, I think we're trying to solve a very large problem here, right? This is a very large, complicated problem that has existed for decades, right? So at Prove AI, you know, the right first step here is just to figure out, like within the realm of data, right? Do we really have the visibility into how data is being used, who's doing what, and then can you build on top of this a sort of secure, verifiable trace down to the actor, down to the data set, down to the region, right, on where this data is going, right? The thing is, though, massive problem. First step is the visibility piece, right? Because if you don't have that and you don't have that sort of setup in place, then a lot of these discussions, right, go nowhere, right? They get confusing, or even worse, you do an exercise once, right? So a very typical problem is hey, I have 10 teams who are each either tuning models or maybe they have some RAG data on some models. I'm scared to death because I don't know what data they're putting into those tuning sets. I don't know where it came from. They're sitting in text files on somebody's desktop, right? This worries me, right? So this is probably a pretty common issue out there, right? So if that's sort of the nearest term problem to address, right? What we at Prove AI, right? What we're doing is saying, well, let's at least solve that first problem first, right? Let's get people to to start building kind of data collection and rules that at least surfaces, hey, what are people doing? What models aren't they downloading from Hugging Face? What's going on people's desktops? What are people putting into their cloud, instances? And at least have start with the reality, with a grounded truth of, what are people, doing first? From there, the journey is much easier, right? So then building onto that, how do you establish trust all the way down, right, to the appropriate layer that you need to? And then how do you automate this in such a way that you can transmit this trust posture either internally or externally, right? Those become easier to solve once you've sort of set up that initial view. So yeah, that's how I do it.
Thank you. Rebecca, I would love to hear also, just adding a little bit, I know you have background in the legal side. I would love to hear from a regulatory angle as well, how does this factor in?
Yeah, so when I think about the regulatory framework around AI and how it's different in the U.S. versus other countries and let's take China, for instance, which I think most of us acknowledge is both a collaborator in technology, but in recent years, we think of them more as a strategic competitor. So speed to market is everything. I know that's easy enough for me to say as an entrepreneur, but honestly, talking to regulators, that is what I emphasize, because we don't have a system in the U.S. where we exercise, state capitalism, if you will. It's not the case that just because you think a particular industry is really important, then that industry is going to be given all the resources, all the regulatory guardrails are going to be removed, and you're just going to drive that industry forward like a rocket ship. That's not how it works in the U.S. We do talk about the risks. We do bring all the stakeholders into the room, give them all a voice, and so it ends up being a very, very long discussion. There are merits to that, but when you're trying to move quickly and build something, obviously you guys see the drawbacks, right? So here, what's really important is that you find a technology solution, and we're all biased in this room, but I do think that DLT is a very viable solution for this. Transparency is key to building trust. So if you can have these data models that are logged onto the chain, have the requisite privacy controls, you can go as far as ZK technology to protect data where it should not be seen by certain parties, I think that would go a long way towards building trust in these data sets and ultimately in the AI that comes out of it. We are in a competitive relationship, and honestly, when DeepSeek came out, one of the things I was really struck by was the surprise, honestly, especially among the national security community in the US. We should be tracking AI developments in China pretty closely, right? But it was a complete shock when it came out. It came out on Friday night, too, so everyone had a great weekend. But I think the surprise was very instructive at the end of the day, because we completely underestimated what could be done with a smaller amount of capital, and we underestimated what could be done with open source learning models. And now that I think we're absorbing that lesson, we're understanding the need for speed in order to catch up, really. So I do think the regulatory framework is going to be a little more flexible. I think it's going to reflect the market reality, and that can only be a good thing for the industry at the end of the day. But make no mistake, I think people are looking at DLT very seriously as a way to speed run this process.
Thank you. Jim?
Yeah, so in a practical sense, let's take a specific example, working with the opioid data. So the thing to understand is that that data, and really this is across the board in healthcare, is siloed already. It's by nature siloed. So it's decentralized. People don't say decentralized, that's the label we use, but really it is that. So that's a good starting point. But then the next thing, if I'm talking to a C-level, the very first question is, how are you going to be secure? How is the system going to be validated? Well, the good news, if you're using DLT, particularly in a decentralized, because since the data is decentralized, we need to connect to the data first in a provable way. Well, we can go to them and say, look, we could do decentralized data connection and use Hedera as a means of verifiability, but retain your existing secure HIPAA-compliant systems at rest. That's a whole lot better than moving all the data to the cloud. That's a really good starting point. And then the next thing from there is, okay, that's great. How do you lower my cost? Because it turns out moving data to the cloud and then running intelligence in the cloud is very expensive. And then we spoke a little bit about explainability and governance. But when you kind of address like the existential issues of, can you remain compliant, HIPAA compliant, don't move the data, and lower my costs, that makes that conversation a whole lot easier. So that's really what we do. And like to give you a more specific example, with the counties are working with and cross-county, cross-state reporting of opioid data, budget is very, very important. The data remaining where it is very, very important. And don't share my data without telling me or without knowledge, and some kind of like a regulatory framework, very, very important. So these are the kind of conclusions we're coming to the way we're going about this.
So very cool. We are in a completely new world now where AI agents are writing themselves new AI agents, right? So we're starting to see completely fully flushed out systems being written by AI themselves as in code, which means innovation, as we thought, the pace at which we were going to do is rapidly changed. Same time next year, we're going to be surrounded by AI systems that's going to be doing a lot of our work. So, look, a last takeaway for this audience. What excites you in the next year, 2 years? What you think at the intersection of AI and DLT, where you see the future? We'll start with you, Greg.
Sure, sure. So, I mean, what excites me most as a technologist, right, is being able to successfully build, right, and build quickly without things getting in my way, right? So, honestly, I mean, there's no specific application or things, right? I just want builders to be able to build, right, like any good technologist or any good CTO. So what excites me the most about this is just for DLT, right, there's already this infrastructure that exists that's sort of a perfect match for getting compliance and risk out of my hair, right, so I don't have to worry about it, right? So that's what developers typically want. That's what certainly my team wants, and that's what I want. I want to be able to do stuff. And I just don't want to hear about what about the risks, what about the compliance, what about all of this other stuff. I want it to be, done. I want to do my stuff and not worrying about it, which is roughly where we've gotten to with cloud software, right? It took us a while, right? And in the beginning, there was knee-jerk reactions of, oh no, how dare you deploy software so quickly, right? We're past that, right? We got past that, right? Now we have new building blocks, lots of complication, right? We want to get to that same space. And what I get so excited about is just like there's a tool right in front of us. There's infrastructure right in front of us, DLT. That's the perfect match for allowing us to be able to transmit stuff to each other, to multiple parties, log stuff in real time, and do that verifiability that all of my esteemed panelists have been talking about here, right, without having to do any additional work. I don't have to build anything, right? So that's what excites me the most. It's just there's this great technology that's right here that allows us to build unencumbered, and all we have to do is figure out how to use it and log stuff to it. So,
awesome.
Right, I'm very happy.
Great, thank you. Just very quickly, Jim, go ahead.
My perspective, doing smaller language models instead of 500 million or like 500 billion, maybe with like 20,000 input tokens, lowering the cost and running it on much smaller compute.
Awesome. Rebecca, last word?
Honestly, very simply put, as soon as you put the power of AI agents into the hands of humans want the agents to become people. That's the behavior that we've seen. But obviously, they are not people. But I think it is through DLT that they can become as human-like as possible.
Awesome. Jonathan?
Wow, that's quite something. That's very good. We're really excited about verifiable compute. We launched a white paper in December with Intel and NVIDIA. It's going to scale to the cloud in Q2 and onwards. And we just can't wait because we know that enterprises are desperate for this type of solution. And really the last barrier is the hyperscalers adopting that and then getting out into the decentralized, the deep infrastructure layer. So yeah, this is the year for verifiable compute, and we're excited to launch that.
Awesome. Listen, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your insights, and more to come at the HederaCon. So.
Thanks.